We confuse connection with belonging far more often than we realize, and that misunderstanding shapes the pain we carry in silence. We live in a world that prizes fitting in over standing out, that teaches us from a young age to make ourselves likable, agreeable, and non-threatening rather than authentic, messy, and real. So we learn to adapt. We shift who we are depending on who's in the room. We code switch, we soften our voice, we dull our ideas, we pretend to be okay with things that violate our truth, all for the sake of connection. And when we do this often enough, it begins to feel like we belong. But what we're actually experiencing is a performance, not a home. Connection in its most common form can be a response to how well we manage others' comfort. Belonging, however, is about how well we can hold on to ourselves in the presence of others. When people like us compliment us, invite us out, include us in their conversations, it creates a temporary sense of acceptance. It feels good. It quiets the part of us that feels left out, misunderstood, or unseen. But it's also fragile. Because if our connection to them is based on who we pretend to be, on our ability to be agreeable, to not cause tension, to not reveal our pain, our boundaries, or our full truth, then it isn't really us they're connecting to. It's our mask. And every time we're praised or accepted in that mask, it sends a subtle but piercing message: you're only lovable if you stay this version of you. This is how we lose ourselves in friendships, relationships, even in families. We start bending our authenticity just a little at a time. We bite our tongue when we should speak up. We laugh at jokes that offend us. We absorb the discomfort instead of creating any. We give more than we're receiving, and we convince ourselves it's just what a good friend does. But over time, this form of connection starts to feel hollow, even painful. We walk away from conversations feeling unseen or disconnected, even though we were technically surrounded by friends. The ache of that disconnect is the cost of confusing connection with belonging. Belonging demands that we risk not fitting in, that we be honest even when it makes the room uncomfortable, that we hold our ground even when it's not received with applause. Belonging says, I'd rather stand alone in my truth than be celebrated for a version of me that's edited. And that level of self-respect isn't easy. It requires grieving the false friendships that can't survive our truth, grieving the way we've abandoned ourselves for connection in the past, grieving the spaces where we tried to belong but were only ever tolerated. Sometimes the people we thought were our friends were really just people who enjoyed a version of us that didn't challenge them. They liked us as long as we stayed small, polite, agreeable. The moment we started asking for more, for honesty, for reciprocity, for space, they began to drift. And that hurts, because we told ourselves we had real connection. But the truth is, you can't build true intimacy on emotional silence. You can't cultivate belonging where you have to mute your truth to stay safe. It's not wrong to want to be liked, to be included, to feel seen. That longing is human, but when that desire overrides our sense of self, when we start negotiating our needs just to be part of something, we don't actually feel less alone. We just feel lonelier inside groups of people. The solution isn't to shut down or isolate, but to learn to recognize the difference. Not every connection is evidence of belonging. Some are just echoes of our need to feel safe, even if the safety is built on self-abandonment. So many people confuse being invited to the table with being valued at it. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely unknown. The reason this confusion is so dangerous is because it keeps us chasing connection at any cost, without ever pausing to ask what it's costing us. We end up mistaking attention for intimacy, routine for relationship, convenience for care. And then when we finally speak our truth, or set a boundary, or evolve into a deeper version of ourselves, we're stunned when those connections fade. But that's the gift of clarity. When you stop contorting yourself just to keep people close, you begin to discover who's truly capable of walking beside you, not just enjoying the version of you that doesn't disrupt their comfort. Loyalty is one of the most sacred values we hold, yet it becomes dangerous when we offer it without boundaries. We're taught that being a loyal friend, partner, or family member means showing up no matter what, standing by someone even when they're wrong, and never walking away even when we're hurting. But loyalty without limits turns into self-betrayal. It becomes a slow erosion of our voice, our energy, and our truth. We start sacrificing parts of ourselves for the sake of keeping the peace, for holding the relationship together, for being seen as the good one, dependable, forgiving, always available. And we don't realize the cost until we're emotionally depleted and quietly resentful. When you're loyal to someone at the expense of your own well-being, that's not a sign of strength. It's a symptom of fear. Fear of being called selfish, fear of being abandoned, fear of not being enough unless you're constantly proving your value. So we stay loyal, not because it feels right, but because it feels safer than the uncertainty of saying, this isn't okay with me anymore. But the truth is, when loyalty asks you to abandon your voice, it's no longer love. It's control in disguise. It's not devotion, it's duty. And no one thrives under emotional duty. We only survive barely. There is a part of us that believes if we are just good enough to others, if we are always there, if we never disappoint, then someone will finally see us and say, you are worthy, you are enough, you matter. But that kind of validation can't come from people who benefit from your silence. It has to come from you. If you keep staying in spaces that drain you, calling it loyalty, you're not proving your love. You're proving how far you're willing to go to be accepted. And that's a dangerous game because the finish line keeps moving. The more you give without boundaries, the more people expect from you and the more invisible you become. People who truly value you will never ask you to betray yourself in order to stay close to them. But if you've built your relationships on being the rescuer, the fixer, the one who never says no, then the moment you introduce boundaries, it's going to feel like betrayal to them, even though it's the first time you're finally being honest. That's the paradox of healing. The people who benefited from your self-neglect will see your boundaries as a threat, not a growth. But that doesn't mean you stop. That means you're finally beginning. You can love someone deeply and still say, I won't tolerate this. You can be committed and still walk away when your worth is on the line. Loyalty doesn't mean you allow someone to use your kindness as a cushion for their harm. It means showing up truthfully, not endlessly. And there is a quiet kind of courage in learning to say, I choose me, even if it disappoints you. That moment is where real self-respect is born, not loud, not dramatic, just steady and clear. Some of us grew up in homes where loyalty was weaponized, where silence was expected, sacrifice was demanded, and leaving was never an option. So now, in our adult lives, we mistake pain for purpose. We think we have to prove our love through how much we can endure. We wear our emotional exhaustion like a badge of honor and call it commitment. But loyalty without boundaries doesn't build connection, it breeds resentment. And resentment, left unchecked, eventually becomes numbness. That's when you find yourself going through the motions of relationships you no longer feel safe in, showing up out of obligation, not desire. That's not love, that's survival. The boundary isn't about pushing people away. It's about making sure you don't disappear in the process of loving them. It's about honoring your own limits so that your yes actually means something. Loyalty is only meaningful when it's mutual, when it's rooted in truth, when it comes with respect on both sides. Otherwise, you're just bleeding yourself dry in the name of being a good person, and goodness without wholeness isn't real. You're allowed to choose peace over loyalty. When loyalty starts costing your dignity, you're allowed to be done. You're allowed to stop proving yourself to people who only love you when you're easy to carry. And maybe the deepest kind of loyalty is the one you owe yourself, the promise that you won't keep abandoning your needs for people who never had the capacity to hold them in the first place. Friendship isn't measured by proximity, but by integrity, though we often get the two confused. Just because someone is physically present in your life doesn't mean they are emotionally or morally present for you. Being around doesn't always mean showing up. Proximity might look like regular calls, constant texts, shared photos, and familiar routines. But those things alone do not build trust. What builds trust, what sustains real friendship, is the integrity to stand by someone's side when it's inconvenient, when they are messy, when they are hard to understand, when they ask for more than what's easy to give. Integrity means your presence matches your promises, your actions reflect your values, and your loyalty doesn't vanish when discomfort enters the room. We tend to hold tightly to people who have always been there, as if history equals harmony. But the length of a relationship is not the measure of its depth. You can know someone for a decade and still not feel emotionally safe with them. You can see someone every week and still feel alone when you're with them. Proximity gives the illusion of intimacy. It looks like closeness. It feels familiar, but that doesn't mean it's real. Integrity is what shows up when you're hurting and need someone to listen without judgment. Integrity is what holds your hand, not just when you're strong and inspiring, but when you're fragile, broken, and complicated. A friend with integrity doesn't disappear when your truth makes them uncomfortable. They don't stay silent when they see you being mistreated. They don't enable your self-destruction in the name of support. Instead, they gently call you back to yourself. They speak the truth even when it risks tension. They protect your name in rooms where you're not present. They apologize when they hurt you, and they don't make you beg for basic emotional decency. This kind of friendship is rare because it requires courage. And most people are afraid of the weight that real friendship carries, the vulnerability, the accountability, the discomfort of growth. There is a kind of loneliness that creeps in even when you're surrounded by people, and it's the loneliness of not being understood. It's the feeling of talking but never really being heard. It's sharing your life with people who don't notice when your smile is forced or your voice is quieter than usual. That kind of loneliness is a sign that proximity has replaced integrity. And it's often easier to stay in those spaces because they feel predictable. But easy doesn't mean safe, and predictable doesn't mean fulfilling. Sometimes we keep people in our lives out of obligation. We confuse shared memories with shared values. We assume loyalty exists simply because they've never left. But absence can happen emotionally long before it happens physically. If someone consistently dismisses your feelings, crosses your boundaries, or only shows up when it's convenient, then they are close in location but distant in character. Friendship without integrity is performative. It's a show, a habit, a pattern that keeps you from truly being seen. And the longer you tolerate that kind of presence, the harder it becomes to believe you deserve more. People with integrity don't just make you feel good, they make you feel safe. Safe to speak your truth, safe to disagree, safe to ask for what you need without fear of guilt or shame. They don't manipulate your silence or twist your vulnerability into a weapon. They don't celebrate you publicly while undermining you privately. Their words match their actions, and their affection isn't conditional on your performance. These people might not be the loudest in the room, but their loyalty is quiet and consistent. They don't need attention to validate their care for you. Their integrity is their love language. Choosing to value integrity over proximity means you may have to let go of people who feel familiar but aren't nourishing. You may have to face the grief of outgrowing someone who's always been around. You may have to sit with the discomfort of building new relationships with people who meet you where you are now, not where you used to be. But that grief is worth it. Because being alone with your truth is far more healing than being surrounded by people who ask you to hide it. Proximity without presence will always leave you empty. But one honest, consistent, emotionally safe friend with integrity will do more for your soul than a dozen people who are just there. Radical acceptance begins when you finally stop expecting you from them. When you release the unconscious demand that other people will love like you, communicate like you, take responsibility like you, or show up with the same depth, care, and loyalty that you give so freely, you start to experience a kind of freedom that's painful at first, but liberating in the long run. Most of our suffering in relationships doesn't come from who people are. It comes from who we believed they would be. We project our standards, our values, and our emotional language onto others, and then we're heartbroken when they don't speak it back to us. It feels like betrayal, but it's often just misalignment, uncomfortable, sobering misalignment between what we offer and what they are capable of returning. When you care deeply, when you think about others before they ask, when you keep promises, even when it's inconvenient, you begin to believe that this is the unspoken contract of human connection. You assume that people who care will do what you do. You expect the same self-awareness, the same honesty, the same courage. But people aren't mirrors. They are messy, layered, and shaped by experiences that you will never fully understand. Some people simply do not have the emotional range to meet you where you are. They don't operate from the same level of accountability. And that's not something you can fix by loving harder, giving more, or explaining yourself better. It's a truth you have to face with open eyes and a grounded heart. The moment you stop expecting you from them is the moment you start grieving who you thought they were. That grief is real. It's the death of an illusion you desperately wanted to keep alive. But illusions make terrible companions. They create resentment because you're constantly disappointed. They create confusion because you're stuck between what you see and what you hope to see. And they create exhaustion because you're always adjusting yourself to avoid the heartbreak of being let down again. Radical acceptance means you stop rewriting their potential and start accepting their patterns. It means you take off the lens of projection and finally see people as they are, not as your inner child wished they would be. That kind of clarity isn't cold, it's compassionate. It gives you permission to let people be human, flawed, inconsistent, and limited. But it also gives you the right to stop negotiating your standards just to keep someone close. You learn to separate understanding someone from excusing them. You can acknowledge that they were doing the best they could with what they knew and still choose not to allow that version of love into your life anymore. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-erasure, and expectations without discernment become heartbreak on repeat. Most of the time when you say, "I wouldn't do that to them," what you really mean is, "I wish they wouldn't do that to me." But they will. Not because they're malicious, but because they are not you. They don't have your emotional vocabulary. They don't feel guilt the way you do. They don't overthink every word or replay every conversation at night. They aren't wired the same way. That doesn't make them bad. It makes them different. And when you accept that difference, you stop taking everything so personally. You stop internalizing their lack as a reflection of your worth. You stop trying to earn the love that someone else doesn't know how to give. Radical acceptance is not about settling for less than you deserve. It's about accepting what is so you can stop arguing with reality. It's about freeing yourself from the exhausting cycle of over-explaining, over-functioning, and over-loving in the hope that they'll finally understand. Some people won't get it. Some people will never meet you where you are. And that is not your failure. It's a reflection of their capacity, not your value. You can love someone deeply and still walk away once you realize they cannot meet you in the ways that matter most. Letting go of the need for reciprocity from people who are not capable of giving it doesn't make you bitter, it makes you wise. It returns you to yourself. It reminds you that not everyone will speak your language, and that's okay. You stop chasing closure from people who don't have the self-awareness to offer it. You stop waiting for apologies that won't come. You stop writing new chapters with people who are stuck in old ones. And you begin to pour that energy back into yourself, into the people who do understand, into the spaces where your emotional depth is not just seen, but valued. You begin to heal, not because they changed, but because you stopped needing them to.